Well, hi, everyone, to another great episode to our podcast, Sock Stars. We are joined today, actually, with our great folks from the RSM US. My name is Vlad Babiuk with Stellar Cyber. Dan and Todd, how about present yourself?
Yeah, good afternoon, Vlad. Thank you for having us. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name is Dan Lauritzen. I am a director within RSM's Defense Group, which is the managed security service provider within RSM.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Thanks, Vlad. Thanks for having us here today. My name is Todd Willoughby. I am also a director inside of the same group as Dan, doing RSM Defense, our managed security arm over here at RSM US.
Well, it's a pleasure having you guys here today, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion. Today's podcast is a little bit of everything. We're talking about the cybersecurity, the market trends, the resiliency, and also about AI specifically, which I think is definitely a conversation to have as it's evolving quite fast. And first off, I just wanted to ask you, from your perspective, what are the biggest macro level trends impacting your customers right now? How much of that is driven by concerns around cybersecurity?
Yeah, so maybe I can kick off with some thoughts, and then Todd, I'd love to hear your perspective as well. But I'd like to begin by calling out a little bit of a selection bias in my answers. Out of my 13-year cybersecurity career, I've spent 9 years of that within managed security services. So typically the clients that I'm interacting with are those that need managed security services, and therefore it's top of mind for them. Coupled with the fact that recently in my last several months here working with RSM, we do serve a client base, which is certainly in the mid-market and slightly upmarket categories. So all of those things are going to kind of color the answers that I give you. But having said all that, things that are top of mind for my clients are certainly navigating compliance requirements and the downstream impacts that create cybersecurity concerns, shifting from operations in a small regional or small family business to more enterprise size and scale, which naturally uncovers needs for cybersecurity capabilities to evolve and mature. And all of these things are really, at the end of the day, cybersecurity is a new horizon for them, something they hadn't previously thought about, and now they have to. They're compelled to think about. So more often than not, the kind of conversations we're having with our clients are around the foundations of a good security program. So identity management across various different kinds of architectures, cloud and on-prem, tooling and coverage that they maybe had never thought about before. So, security information and event management certainly being one of those categories, but endpoint protections, something beyond firewall, anything beyond firewalls generally is a net new concept to a lot of the clients we speak with. There's also other key elements that are interesting to them, such as vendor navigation. So now, Todd and I work in a managed security service. That's oftentimes a new challenge for them to deal with vendors and providers that are doing something other than just managing and keeping the lights on in IT. So how do you speak to those vendors? How do you deal with those vendors? How do you ask them questions to know that they're being successful? How do you do an apples to apples comparison amongst those different vendors? It's kind of a new domain or new horizon for them as well. So all of these things I would say are areas or elements of conversations that we have around cybersecurity with our clients, but wrap around all of that, the concept that they're in an inflection point and it's a new horizon for them, right? So that's typically the kinds of clients that we're interacting with. And then to answer your question more directly, the kind of conversation we're having with them is around solid security foundations.
Yeah, I think Dan hit the nail on the head there. It's great insights, and he's absolutely correct. That is, those are relative conversations that we're having every day with our clients. But I think from my standpoint, even at a macro level, there's definitely conversations still occurring around technology adoption and digital transformation efforts, especially around the middle market, which is what we primarily deal with. Companies that haven't previously had to think about prioritizing, say, AI, IoT, automation to either help increase or boost efficiencies. They're now thinking about those, but yet what that conversation leads into is the expanding attack services that they also produce around, cloud migration, supply chain vulnerabilities that may result in downstream impact to the organization that aren't fully thought of initially at the get-go or onset of those conversations being had. And I think, at a broader topic as well is, the conversations from trending, we try to steer the conversation around, cyber isn't just a cost center anymore. It's more of a foundation of customer trust and operational continuity for the business that we're dealing with ultimately at the end of the day these days. And that's a real world, moving beyond IT into the boardroom, conversation that organizations are going to have to start having.
Well, that's actually really great answers, and actually flows in very well with the second question around resiliency and business continuity. I'm seeing this very often actually coming in from managed security services when you're working with a customer that is trying to, up level their security posture, increase their SOC capability, and really be able to help out their SOC going from more of a prevention perspective to a more resilient. How do your customers typically address the concept of resiliency? Is it a top of mind topic for them, or where do you find yourself having to introduce its importance?
Yeah, Vlad, that's a great question. Resiliency is obviously top of mind for a lot of our clients, especially our RSM defense customers. We preach around trying to be proactive as possible, and that leads to increased resiliency at the end of the day. I think our customers, at least the level of awareness and prioritization, it varies depending on the type of organization's maturity and cyber exposure appetite, I would say. But for many clients, resiliency to them is not just about recovering from incidents. It's about potentially ensuring continuity, against these cyber threats, as well as, resiliency goes beyond cyber into natural disasters and operational disruptions. But we're here to help solidify, the conversation around, approaching resiliency through, either appropriate planning, making sure our service delivery managers are having conversations proactively with clients, making sure that we're getting the best technology adaptations in there, and, applying the cultural shifts, because that's a big piece of where the threat actors operate. They thrive off cultural shifts in these environments, and that's how they use to exploit and gain access into these organizations. But typically, if we're talking more tactical levels, we do a lot of proactive risk assessments, incident response and recovery plans. And then obviously we come in where the tooling part comes in. We're using it in a managed fashion, but applying advanced cybersecurity tools, or in most cases, giving them access to advanced cybersecurity tools that are using, concepts like AI and things like that, and automation that otherwise those organizations may not have the capitalization funds and investments to buy themselves.
Yeah, Vlad, so you had asked the question of whether or not we have to introduce the topic and kind of drive the importance in that conversation. My response to that would be yes and no. Again, as I said in my first answer, a lot of this is contextualized by the fact that I'm oftentimes dealing with clients and, looking for a security services provider. But when I do get involved in strategic conversations with my clients, I would say that this concept of resiliency comes up, but it comes up perhaps in what I would call an incomplete context. So oftentimes clients are thinking about resiliency in more of a tactical sense of being retention focused or identifying retention requirements mapped to compliance requirements or BCDR goals. That kind of limits the understanding of the importance against ransomware protections, or kind of how resiliency ties into the broader security posture of the organization, right? So I think the piece that we have to try to drive within those strategic conversations is to open our clients' minds to the full context of resiliency and its importance to actually protect against cybersecurity threats. And again, given that oftentimes the conversation is so heavily focused at the onset on retention, we oftentimes have to shift our clients' thinking to consider process resiliency. What tools and what underlying systems are you using so that your critical systems can actually have some fault tolerance, or can have some downtime, or can be attacked and have diminished capacity and bandwidth, but not bring the organization and bring business operations to its knees. Those kinds of things, if you think through a cybersecurity and a defender's mindset, those kinds of questions will naturally present themselves and kind of get you out of the limited view of just retention and system uptime.
I couldn't agree more with you, Dan and Todd. I think it's very important making sure that you harden their defense, you reduce their downtime, you provide them with the right tools that are required and are necessary for them to be able to succeed in operating SOC. One of the other questions that I actually would be interested to know, and it actually kind of flows in because I think AI in some way or another will provide the ability for a lot of the customers, also from a resiliency perspective, to become more understandable of what's going on in their environments. And so one of the questions that I wanted to see is what are your customers asking about, generative AI and AI in general? Are they eager to adopt, or are they more cautious about the risk associated with using it?
So as a starting point, Vlad, I would say that yes, the conversation is happening frequently and we're being asked questions constantly about generative AI and AI as a general topic. But I think one of the things that comes up in my mind quite often is generally a lack of understanding of the underlying concepts and the pillars of AI that just kind of becomes exposed with the questions we get asked. So there's a lack of understanding of the concepts of data collection and data availability to feed the models, the interplay or the creation of LLMs versus the applications that might be wrapped around those LLMs. That fundamental understanding of how those pillars operate and their dependency on each other, with a lack of understanding of those concepts, the questions are oftentimes pretty surface level around, what are you concerned about with Copilot? Well, what are you concerned about with Copilot? Are you concerned that you're exposing sensitive data with its use built into your applications? Are you concerned about your customers or your employees going out and using other applications that you haven't vetted to throw prompts into them that could contain business information? So I think a better understanding of those core concepts, and that's our job to provide it, by the way, to drive that better understanding, but a better understanding of those core concepts will yield better questions and therefore better conversations with our clients. But to go back to the second part of your question, I would say that our clients are cautiously optimistic and opportunistic in their adoption of AI. There are very few that I'm aware of that are diving in with both feet and really kind of adopting the bleeding edge. And a lot of it, quite frankly, is vendor led. So a lot of the baked in capabilities that vendors are putting out there in the marketplace is really kind of driving adoption for a lot of our clients, as opposed to grabbing, models or, underlying architectures, AI architectures, and building them for themselves, using them for themselves. A lot of it's a product wrapped around a model. So I think we're really just kind of barely scratching the surface of Gen AI, and particularly how Gen AI is being used by attackers and how that changes the client's threat landscape. That's another area that we oftentimes have to kind of lead the clients to start asking questions about.
Yeah, I think Dan hits some real critical topics there. Typically, from my perspective, I'm seeing, when I'm dealing with, on the more tactical side, security teams, they're always eager to adopt, right? They generally better understand the technical implications of what the benefits are going to bring, especially responding to advanced cyber threats, right? And threat detection capabilities that AI can bring today. On the business side, they're generally more cautious, right? Focusing on potential vulnerabilities, compliance concerns, even down to like ethical implications, right, around that. Again, from a tactical perspective, running the operations side of the business here, we always hear that threat actors are going to be using, AI filtered attacks to come out from you, and they're using blockchain AI powered toasters, right? Compromised networks. I think a lot of that, to some degree right now, is some minor levels of fear mongering a little bit, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. It's something we have to keep in tune with. But we have already seen AI powered filtering or phishing campaigns, coming in through our operations center. And we have, again, the appropriate AI tools on our back end to help mitigate and respond to those at scale. But they are out there. They are being used to some varying degrees, but not to the degrees that I think you see them sensationalized on the news and in the media. But they are coming, and they're going to continue to evolve. And I think one of the things that Dan mentioned that we do very well here, especially on the RSM defense side, is we help bridge the gap, right, between those conversations and having clients understand the guardrails for the transparency around those AI applications and implementations, and understand the compliance regulatory areas they may find themselves in as we work through those implementations that they want to use. And a lot of that is also vendor-led, right? There's a lot of good vendors in the space that are pushing AI down for the right reasons, I think, to ultimately make their products and services better. But yeah, that's where we can help, and we should be helping guide those guardrails for transparency and how those applications are used within the environment. Just make them aware of the risks.
I couldn't agree more with you guys. And I think when you look back 2 or 3 years ago or so, when ChatGPT kind of came out with the whole play around some of the capabilities that were possible with it, I remember a lot of the vendors who are actually leading the conversation and trying to integrate ChatGPT within their solution, trying to showcase its ability to provide, additional insight into a particular case or alert, and some of the next steps that can be done with it in order to mitigate the particular or eradicate a particular situation. But I think there was some confusion still at the beginning. People are still trying to figure out exactly, is that really going to provide me with a true return on investment? Is that something that I'm really willing to spend the time and money right now? On the vendor side, yes, they were probably trying to kind of move towards that trend. I think a lot of people who have seen a great success, whether it's from a vendor perspective, from a customer, I think it's more of those ones that, look, there is this ability to provide that kind of feature right now. How am I going to be implementing it, and making sure that I'm implementing those proper guardrails, that I'm not exposing some of the customer information or client information or employee information, while at the same time getting true benefit out of it. And kind of going into that, like, AI is not new by no means, right? Like, we know it's a broad term. So let's categorize it. How do you see different types of AI, like generative AI? I see a lot of generative AI capability being done around providing, like I said, like threat summaries and the next steps, creating some of the rules, predictive analytics as well, like UEBA capability, which is a great example, taking the historical content, or automation, like SOAR capability, but now we're seeing more like hyper automation, AI SOC and things like this. So I just wanted to see, like, how is this playing distinct roles for your customers today?
Yeah, Vlad, you bring up a good point, right? There is a lot of confusion around the terms AI, right? When, it takes somebody, I think, who's in tune with the industry to understand when vendors are maybe, stretching the limits of the word AI, when in fact they're really talking about machine learning or predictive analytics or potentially automation. It can kind of get bundled up together and maybe diluted a little bit by using the blanket term AI. But, from a detection standpoint, right, we're using a lot of generative AI to focus better on providing some better definitions as well. But we use generative AI to, help simulate attack scenarios, and mainly around threat detection. We've seen, like machine learning models like Stellar, for example, uses in their platform, having predictive analytic capabilities to, potentially find threats based on historical data and patterns that we're seeing in our clients' traffic that's coming through. I think that's going to help empower a, productive security posture for them, and a more responsive security posture, rather than being defensive all the time. And I think that's going to help provide clarification around, based upon the types of alerts that we're seeing, how we can put terminology around the potential misunderstandings that AI can potentially have as far as an industry perspective goes, and where we need to combine what the marketing is and what's happening in the real world.
Yeah, I think Todd did a great job there of speaking to some of the technical capabilities that we as a service and as an organization are keeping track of and keeping an eye on, and how they can be implemented by our clients for better gains. But so I'll answer in a slightly different context. I believe that as far as types of AI are concerned, what I'm seeing is the truly generative AI, or the agentic AI, particularly in a business context, will continue to stay slow moving for the foreseeable future. Maybe not the foreseeable future, certainly within a short window, as really only vanguards are moving to truly use it to drive business operations. Rather, I think some of the other elements that you've called out in your question around automation and analytics, I think that's really where most of the activity that I'm seeing happening, where that's taking place. And I believe that's kind of due to what I'll call like a drag effect. So the vanguard, or the bleeding edge of the industry, is pushing so far to the right in a certain context. And it's kind of dragging along the conversation, such that those that are a little more conservative to adopt are coming up to the level of what was bleeding edge, or what was, leading 5 to 10 years ago, right? So I think there's massive adoption of analytics by way of AI and ML and automation. And I think we'll continue to see that, with the exception of those that are truly at the real forefront, at the vanguard. So what can our clients do to prepare for this? In my opinion, I think the single biggest issue for my clients is, the impending ubiquity of artificial intelligence in every tool you interact with, that's being driven by the market. Anybody that wants to go to market today, or anybody that has a product out in the market today, has to answer the question of how it's using AI, whether it's, a natural use, or whether it's being forced unnaturally. Every product has to answer how it is using AI in its product. So that ubiquity that's being driven by the market, our clients have to learn how to interact with those products that they've already purchased, or that they intend to purchase. So again, going back to my previous answer, they have to get a really solid grasp on the core concepts of how AI even is implemented. and how that is actually being implemented within the tools that they already use, right? Yeah, there's a new AI agent that's been, added on to your existing suite of software that you use to interact with your team. But where is that information actually being processed to spit out those insights? Or where is the information being stored? And then how is the model crawling over the top of it to produce those really nice and flashy meeting notes, those automated meeting notes? Well, you might want to consider what your team is actually talking about, if it's R&D or if it's acquisition strategy. And if you're putting that information out there for those tools to crawl over to provide those AI insights, those are things that our clients need to start thinking about, because the ubiquity is making that a requirement these days. So that's kind of my number one point. My second point is there are really a differentiated set of skills that are necessary now, right? So if you really want to take advantage of the automation and the analytics capabilities that are driven by AI, you need to have people on your team that understand data, that understand how to, make data available for these models to run on top of, and that understand the interactions of those models, so that, again, you can make those business aware decisions of where you're going to allow AI within your organization and where you want to keep it out for security purposes. And then the final point there is apply all of that thinking to your vendors. All of our clients have a vendor ecosystem. You really need to ask your vendors how they're using AI and if you're okay with their use of AI for all the reasons I just mentioned.
I couldn't agree more with you, Dan and Todd. And I think that's definitely something that we're seeing that's evolving as well from the vendor perspective, like additional kind of guardrails that are being put in. I know we talked about it a little bit early on around the resiliency and stuff like that, but we're seeing as well, companies that are emerging from that, providing AI firewalls, AI guardrails, AI governance, you name it, it's becoming a nominal thing. Besides the fact that, there's companies as well that have the ability to really make sure that the AI is being taught to do certain things that are as per the company's guidelines. But coming down to that, one last question that I had, where do you see AI, cybersecurity, and resiliency heading in the next few years? What should business be preparing for now?
Yeah, I really just want to reiterate the points I made in the previous answer. Be prepared for the ubiquity of artificial intelligence. It's one of probably, in my lifetime, 3 paradigm shifts that are really going to impact every single corner of everything we do, right? The internet probably being the last one, the invention of the internet. It's really going to permeate literally everything that we do and all of the tools that we use in a business context. So our clients need to educate themselves, and they need to be asking tough questions. And if they are not sure how to ask those questions, they should seek help from those who do. But this is not a movement that anyone can afford to ignore. So yeah, I just kind of defer to my previous answer on the ubiquity of artificial intelligence and all the things you need to do to prepare yourself for that.
Dan is correct there. And I want to echo some of his comments there that he had. I do think AI isn't going anywhere. It is here to stay. And from a security standpoint and a threat operations standpoint, we're going to see the continuation of that being used to drive and force multiply security teams to become more effective ultimately at the end of the day. For some of the right reasons, some of the wrong reasons, I think. I have some competing opinions on what AI is going to eventually, its long-term outcome is going to be. And I'll touch on one of those here very quickly, is that, it's the teach a man to fish scenario. There is a lot of fundamentals and foundations that need to go into understanding security operations and understanding the genesis of why these threats are occurring. If I sit there and I catch fish for you all day and you don't know how to catch fish and I'm not there one day, you're eventually going to go hungry. So if we're relying on AI too much to answer those proverbial questions and not train the technology teams that are responding to them on how it's doing what it's doing, it's going to present a problem when advanced threats and uses of that technology are turned the other way around. So I think those are some concerns I have where it's heading in the future, but I think it's going to do more good. And people, Dan alluded to the fact that you got to understand the data behind it. You need people that understand data on the back end to feed these technologies, so that it's going to require a different set of skills and people to drive them and run them and operate them. But I think from a resiliency standpoint, right, AI is eventually going to get to a point where it's going to be able to predict potential disruptions, whether that be cyber attacks, supply chain issues, and then automate the responses. And as Dan pointed out earlier, to minimize downtime or provide more fault tolerancy to already mission critical business systems. And AI is potentially going to be able to, reroute resources or isolate compromised systems in real time, right? We're going to see that's the next phase and next iteration of that. But it is going to penetrate all of those areas of where there's a lot of, frankly, in the cybersecurity space, and manual effort being done today. And I think it's going to automate that, in the first phase, probably 30%, right? At least to start. It's not going to boil the entire ocean, but it's going to start encroaching into those areas where manual intervention is typically needed in the cybersecurity space. And then again, like the future also, we're talking about building systems that are not only secure, but they also need to be adaptive and sustainable and capable of surviving business fault tolerant threats. Because the world is always changing, the landscape is always changing, the threat vectors are going to change, the threat actors are adapting to change faster than ever, right? They're able to stand up new schemas and organizations and infrastructure in real time almost. And AI is going to help us level that playing field, I think, at the end of the day.
Couldn't agree more with you guys. I think there's definitely a really bright future for us from a security perspective. Definitely AI is evolving in ways that I think a couple of years ago, we wouldn't have thought about this actually happening. I always look at like UBA. UBA a long time ago, people didn't really understand how it worked and what it did, kind of becoming more and more kind of embedded as well. But definitely AI capability, the resiliency that can come from it as well, I think is going to be very beneficial to a lot of small, medium-sized and enterprise companies moving forward. I really enjoyed this conversation. Appreciate your time, Dan and Todd, for joining us at this podcast at SOC Stars. Really looking forward to the next one doing with you guys.